Standing in This Place is a community arts project by me, Rachel Carter, based on the historic research of Bright Ideas Nottingham and the Legacy Makers. We're going to tell the story of women working in the Midlands textile mills and the enslaved working in the cotton fields in the Americas and the Caribbean.
I'd like to welcome to the podcast my special guest, writer, campaigner and poet, Cara Thompson. Welcome to the podcast, Cara.
Thank you, Rachel. It's really great to be here with you and to speak with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, you're welcome. So we first met, I think it was last year, at one of the Legacy Makers events where they were delving into the history of the Evans family who owned a cotton mill. And I got to see you perform. So, and I understand you've got a piece that you're going to do for us today, but before we do that, could you give us a little bit about, who is Cara? Give us an introduction.
Sure. So Cara, me, is, I'm a poet based and born and bred in Nottingham, but my family come from Jamaica. So I take a lot of influence and a lot of pride in that element of my history and my heritage, and a lot of my work reflects that. It reflects that kind of, I think, quite special and nuanced experience that I've had growing up as a Black British Caribbean woman in this country. And I try and use my work as a vehicle to really almost treat it as like an activist practice and bring people in on conversations that they might not be having on the day-to-day, and just spread awareness and things like that as well. So my activism is informed by art, and my art is informed by activism. It's kind of this this reciprocal relationship, I guess.
Yeah, I get that. So, and has creative writing been something that, has always been one of your creative outlets?
It's an interesting one. It's kind of, I've always kind of floated in and out of it in a really strange way. So, I mean, I loved reading as a kid. I think that is something that's kind of always underpinned like my kind of self kind of creative expression and things like that. But writing is something I really only kind of came into around 15, 16 years old. So I studied creative writing at college. I went to Bilborough College and studied creative writing there. But I remember finishing the course and just not really thinking anything of it. I kind of just finished it and I was like, well, that's that. There's no careers in creative writing. So just carry on with your English literature. And it was only through kind of connecting with other creatives that I kind of gave writing a go. And since then it's just kind of taken off in its own way. But yeah, definitely not always been where I was at. I'd consider myself an activist first before I was a writer, for sure.
Right. It is interesting talking to other creatives and finding out about their creative journey. It's never a straight path, is it?
No, never, ever.
And it's great to hear that you can combine multiple passions within within your creative writing, or when you're campaigning, that they often overlap, as they do with my own practice. There's quite a few different passions overlap and inform one another. So I think that might be quite a nice if we actually hear a piece that you've written, because I think that's just going to without me sitting here talking about it, your poem is just going to speak for itself. So yeah, you prepared a piece for us.
I have, yeah. So this is a poem called My Activism, which is quite fitting. It's a poem that I wrote kind of as a reflection on my journey really through activism. So for those who don't know, Nottingham was the first place to have a Black Lives Matter chapter in the UK, or in Europe actually, I believe. And this was in 2014, and I was about 15 years old, and that was really where I sort of started. But over time I kind of came to, while still being appreciative of all the experiences I had at that time, I kind of learned that there are so many ways we can approach activism, and we don't just have to be marching. We can be thinking or unlearning or creating, or so many different avenues. So this is what that this poem is about, just kind of really meditating on what activism means to me. My activism. My activism is as quiet as firing neurons and as loud as falling statues. It creeps upon you silently, scrawls love notes on your walls, and crawls inside your ballot boxes. My activism is skeptical. Its nose twitches at lip service, it itches, burns beneath the friction of scrolling fingers and Judas kisses. My activism is supple, malleable like clay. It's eager to learn, to take shape in the deep cracks of weathered hands and cure with the sands of wisdom and time. My activism is ancestral. It's written in the lines of my heel and my double helix. It traverses through time, straddling a battalion of broad-shouldered women who birthed dark armies and rained fire from the mountain tops. My activism is bottomless. Its waters run deep. It invites you to drink, to savor, to blink against the shadows and lock eyes across the darkness. And my activism is expansive. Its arms stretch like elastic to find you. It reminds you to pull against the status quo until something finally snaps. Thank you.
Wow. I love how all there's so many images that was playing around in my head as I was listening to you perform that piece. You paint pictures so beautifully, and I love the idea of the elastic, that pulling and pulling, and then eventually that little twang as one of them gives way. That's beautiful. Thank you, Cara. This idea of using creative writing and campaigning that brought us to work together to try and inspire a group of young people. And we really wanted to get young people involved in this podcast. And there was a fantastic exhibition about young people and protest at the National Justice Museum. So I reached out to you to see if you could help inspire a group of 15 young writers. And it was just such an amazing session, wasn't it?
It was really special. I mean, even for me, it was really my first time leading a workshop of that nature, where it was this really kind of mixed media thing where we were responding to art as well as kind of responding to our own ideas around activism. And I was just gobsmacked by just the wisdom that a lot of these young poets had, and an honesty that I think would serve a lot of us as we kind of navigate the world as we know it. So yeah, it was a really special session, and I felt really grateful to be able to be a part of it. So thank you.
Yeah, and the mix of ages and backgrounds. I think the eldest in was around 23, and the youngest in the group was around 12 years old. But they took that idea of that and responding from the gallery about looking at what tools have young people got to make their voice heard, and how do they protest, and all the tools at their disposal, from social media to wearing things on your person, to attending marches. And I think one of the interesting thing was that when we asked them to respond, and to the narrative of as part of standing in this place, and then thinking about young people in protest, how different the outcomes were. I was quite astounded at that breadth of work that they've produced.
No, absolutely. And I think for me, it was a real lesson in like you mentioned, that there was that age gap, and I think there's always that initial worry that, is someone going to be too young for this kind of conversation, or will they be on sort of different levels? But it really shows, don't underestimate, the younger generation when it comes to their ability to really speak on how they feel and speak on the world, and to give their views on the world as well. And
Mm.
if anything, it was a lesson that they should be given a lot more agency to kind of make their mark, and which I don't think we often get in this country, sadly.
Yeah,
Uh, but it was really special in that way, I think, in that it kind of broke down my own personal understanding of how early you should be having these conversations.
definitely. Yeah. Well, let's hear one. So we're going to start off with George Burnett, and he's 23, and he was really interested in the history side of the project. So his piece was called In the Factory, and we're going to hear it now.
I smiled at you the other day, a beaming grin of tooth decay, but looms were whirring, bosses loud, and smiling's really not allowed. Today the cotton's in my bones, my legs are weak, my chest it groans. I feel a hand, look up and see, you grin at me, I beam with glee.
Wow, George really does paint that picture of the life of the factory workers. The way he used his voice.
I just took another note about that. Quite literally, just did made the exact same observation. It's like
Mm.
that idea of the groan is in his voice throughout the poem. It's like he's channeling this voice of someone within this factory. Takes you his voice on its own takes you to a whole other place, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and I wasn't expecting that at all. That element of performance.
Yeah,
And I suppose is that something that you start to develop your own kind of rhythm and style as you become, as you do more and more poetry readings. Is that something that develops?
absolutely. It wasn't something that came naturally to me at all. I mean, I think for a lot of poets, we start out writing and then the performance comes after. Or it can be the other way around. You might be a performer first and a writer next. But when you write, you often aren't necessarily thinking about the delivery or how it sounds. And when you're just putting something on a page, you're almost giving the reader that responsibility to discover the tone themselves.
Mm.
But once you're a performer, you're really the one directing how these words are going to land. Um, and that does take a lot of thought, and I think that's why I was so impressed by what George has done, because you can feel the intention in the exact kind of atmosphere he's trying to create just through his voice. I think even if we didn't understand what George was saying, we know that he was delivering something quite sinister,
Yeah.
and quite ominous, and that takes real skill. So I get chills every time I listen to this one, to be honest. It's
Yeah.
really special.
Very much so. And then on the other end of that kind of spectrum of performance, we're going to now hear Jess. So she's one of our youngest contributors. She's aged 12, and she's created quite a powerful piece titled News, and we're going to hear that now.
I turn on the news. Bad news. Guns, violence, murder. Weapons, death, torture. The news is a monster that consumes you and worries about the world. Good washes away in waves, leaving you to doubt yourself. Rules restricting our lives, putting us in a box or behind a barrier. Screaming, shrieking, nobody listens, not a sound. News, a sidekick of society. Its mission to tell you the worst of the world. Making enemies. Don't listen, don't look. it'll have you wrapped around its cruel finger. Look at the world, look at it with a smile. Don't give in to it like the others have. Their minds made to believe what it says, like a comfort blanket, whilst most of us walk on fire, not believing a word.
Well, so different from the first poem. So Jess's piece was very striking, wasn't it?
It's like it's from a whole other dimension to George's. George, it takes you, like you say, on this historical journey, this journey of cotton that we're still on. And then Jess, I feel, is really speaking on a modern kind of a modern unease. And it's an unease with media and the way that we interact with media and the news specifically. And this quite bleak idea of the news is something that we can't really trust anymore. And it's really it's a really deep topic, to be honest. It really gets into how what is the news doing to us as people. It's not just how are we interacting with the news, it's what it's doing to us in return. And how it's kind of affecting us as a society, I think. So a really profound topic to hit on. And again, like you say, from a totally different angle, but still equally as powerful, I think, in its own unique way.
Yeah. And, those observations from a young girl of 12, and very powerfully put, the way that she'd used single words, almost punctuated, almost with full stops at the end of each word, so she could deliver them really strongly. It was great.
Yeah, something about that listing feels relentless. It feels as relentless as that continuous just feed of bad news that we have nowadays. So really, really clever the way that she's done that and built that, just that exhaustion almost with what you're having to take in with the news nowadays.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the great things, I suppose, with creative writing, as it is with other creative disciplines, that within each area, I suppose within each discipline, there's still multiple ways that you can go. And I think what we're hearing is, there's so many styles of poetry and the ways of delivering it, and we're just getting that flavour coming through from the young people that have submitted their poems.
Totally. And I really didn't want to limit them on how to approach it in terms of their own sort of writing style. Like, I think for me, a huge part of why I love poetry is it's a place where you can release. It's kind of cathartic in a way, and everyone's going to show up and do that in a different way. And again, I think I was worried about that at first. I was like, should I be giving them more guidance in that? But I mean, just from the material alone, that you can tell they didn't really need it.
Yeah.
They just knocked it out of the park, to be honest.
Definitely. So our next one is from Abby Hutchinson, and she's 19, and her poem is called "To All the Women Who Blame Themselves," and we're going to hear that now.
To all the women who blame themselves. Facing the Garden of Eden, you undressed, asked if you'd repeat her mistakes, as if you are not already carbon copied. Met with silence of the strangely familiar, you grimaced. Place your hands on your body of Venus, squeezed every inch that wasn't standardized by beauty, slowly removing the gaze of inner child, replacing it with damage that's internal, eternal. You cling to your own skin, try to remember what it was like before him, stand directly in front of the mirror of Eden, search for mistakes in your own image. Ask Eve to repaint you before the sin of Adam. She points to the sun, lets me cook, but my skin is too dirty and cannot be cleaned with poetry. He was my apple, now it's my turn to fall. Like empires, cities, and the women before me, I'll stand back up.
Gosh, it it makes me want to cry, this poem.
Yeah, yeah. That last line it just rings out. It's the kind of thing you want to see just written in stone somewhere. It's really, really just such a special poem, and it feels so rich. And I think that richness comes from just the way she's tapping into these kinds of stories of women that are kind of these founding narratives around womanhood, the story of Eve, and kind of linking us all back to this kind of this collective story of women and our condemnation and our ability to get back up again. So again, so different from the others, but so special.
To give the young people such an open brief about, looking at that story of Cotton, a bit about protest and about sort of trying to make those changes. It's quite interesting to see what bits that they started to sort of work upon, from that session, and they've gone off in very different directions.
And that's it too. I think when you're doing what I think a great word for it is called artivism, and that's the combination of activism and arts, using the arts as your own kind of expression. It should be that you're able to really look at what it is that touches you. And I think all of these people, or these poets, have really spent time thinking what it is that struck them, and where they feel they can contribute their voice the most, or in a way that feels that honors them and honors the cause that they're interested in. And I think that's exactly how all activism should be. It's like doing what you can with what you have. And I feel like all of them have really done that in a really important way.
Definitely, yeah. So let's move on to our next submission now, and it's by a young lad called Joshua, and he's age 12, also like Jess, who we've heard earlier, and his piece is called Under Pressure, and let's hear that now.
Under pressure to act, not respected, ignored throughout history, each and every person destroyed. Actions against the world, great desire from these people at these protests, irritated, naive people who are fighting for their rights, shouting out protests with pride, tarnishing people's lives, people showing off their pride, rampaging through the streets, enraged, jealousy building, unbelievable, disapproving, ignoble people, committed to these protests, ending all discrimination.
Powerful again, just like with Jess, that sort of really punctuating those words.
Yeah, there's a punch to both of them. I think that connects those two in a way. There's this punchiness to it, and this directness, I think some people find uncomfortable, probably, or might not be used to. But I think it's something that a lot of us, to be honest, I think should take inspiration from. That if we're feeling discontent, if we're feeling angered by something, how are we verbalizing that? How are we expressing that? How are we being honest about that? And I think that's what I appreciate about this poem, Under Pressure. There was also this one line that jumped out to me: ignored throughout history, each and every person destroyed. I think that says something around, or at least my interpretation, because that's the other special thing. We're listening, but we might have totally different understandings of the poems than the writers do. But that's what's so great. You can go away and take your own meaning. But when I listened to that line, I thought about how when we don't acknowledge the past, or we don't acknowledge history, we destroy that history. And that's what I kind of took from that poem. And I think that's a really powerful lesson. It definitely speaks to your project as well. And that importance of just acknowledgement, of seeing, of witnessing. And yeah, I think that the overall feeling I get from this poem is frustration. And I wish more of us would own our frustration in that way, because I think the world would be able to move forward a little bit faster at times.
Yeah. Yeah, you can almost sort of imagine when he's describing, these sort of rivers of young people protesting and not feeling like they're making a difference, but they are. But as they come together as one strong river flowing through the city, shouting and protesting, they make themselves, feel present. And that really came across.
Yeah, absolutely. I almost kind of visualized two opposing sides kind of at the very moment they're about to clash, or just it's this kind of the friction before something really changes, I think is what I kind of imagined. But yeah, really interesting to see how we've both kind of gotten these different imagery out of this one poem.
Definitely. So, these the young people, they're part of a group with the organisation Writing East Midlands, and it was just a fantastic day to get to work with some of these young people and get them inspired and writing more. So before we come to an end, this episode has gone so quickly, but I'm going to hand the reins back over to you, Cara, and to finish with another one of your pieces, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So this piece is one that's really special to me, because I feel like it's the first poem I wrote where I really discovered what it is I love writing about, or what I want to speak about. And it's called Island Screams, and it's a poem that reflects on my sort of upbringing as a woman of Black, British, Caribbean heritage, Jamaican specifically. Both my parents, sides of the families come from Jamaica. And yeah, I just really wanted a poem to reflect on both the beauty and the frustration of that reality sometimes. So that's what this poem's about. I actually used this poem to enter a competition called Slamavision, which is sort of like the slam equivalent of poetry. And you compete against different cities across the world, and actually won that competition. So
wow.
I feel pride for this poem as well, because it kind of, I got to represent Nottingham with it. And to think that this is kind of such a unique and niche sort of story is now kind of able to represent my city in that way. I feel really privileged to have been able to do that. So yeah, this is called Island Screams. Where are you from? Me? I'm from Nottingham. No, I mean, like, where are you from? Right. I see. Well, that's easy. I'm Windrush, hybrid, island spawn. I'm sun, I'm sea, I'm rain, I'm storm, cast out, cast in. I'm hope, reborn and lost as soon as it was formed. I'm bloody rivers, battleships. I'm ackee, saltfish, fish and chips. I'm cocoa butter on your lips. I'm soursop. I'm apple pips. I'm from the land of wooden huts and bras made out of coconuts, where ganja burns and Europe tuts from inside of their history books. I'm blue magic and hot combed hair. I'm from the blood-stained windows where the ivory banks of Europe glare and leave my empty pockets bare. I'm from a distant echoed thread, an island that I've never met, where sun and sea and toil and sweat are called your favourite vacay yet. From Caliban and animals, 2 steps away from Crusoe and his cannibals, an island of black Hannibals. You dream about that package to Montego Bay you found on Thompson holidays, where trees bend back and snap their roots to guide you on your merry way. So many days of mine are spent repenting for a helpless crime. I swing upon a slowly snapping vine until I realize I'm sugarcane. I'm wind. I'm rain. I'm hurricanes that tear the ground. I'm ancestors that won't be found, whose bodies beat from underground. I'm red-skinned ghosts that haunt your dreams. I'm Nanny, sea coal, Puckamania screams that call across the sea to find their way right back to me. Does that answer your question? Thank you for listening.
Wow, another fantastic piece, Cara, and thank you for performing it for us on the podcast. I can see why that won. You know, it's just I'm blown away by it. I really am.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's one that I think I was gobsmacked at the time because I didn't think anyone who wasn't from the kind of journey that I've had wouldn't really understand it. And so it was really special that people who don't even necessarily speak the same language kind of felt something. And I felt really seen because of that. I felt I felt something beyond just like my own country's lines. Do you know what I mean? I felt very connected to people in that way. And I think that's really the power of poetry, that ability to connect beyond understanding or experience.
Yes, so beautifully put. It does. It's sort of that connection, that painting those pictures, the storytelling, the history, the now, the past, it all blends together, and you do it so well. So Cara, I just want to thank you again for being part of this project and also part of this podcast. It's been really wonderful getting to know you and getting to experience some of your poetry.
Thank you. I mean, I've just got immense gratitude and respect for what it is that you're doing and how you've really pulled so many corners of the community together with this project, which I think is exactly what it's about, kind of bridging those forgotten gaps, I suppose. And I just feel really, really privileged to have been able to have done a small part in just this amazing sort of colossal thing that you're doing for the city.
Oh, thank you, Cara. Yeah, it does feel at times like it's a massive mountain to climb, but like you said, you know, all those corners of the community are all coming together, and it's great to feel that support. You know, when you've got this creative idea in your head, and then you can then pass that on to others who then add their creativity to it, and it kind of builds together as one. So it's a big creative journey that we're going on, Cara, and we're getting there.
Thank you for listening to the Standing in This Place podcast. If you'd like to find out more, you can head over to my website, rachelcarter.co.uk, or you can head to any of the socials, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and YouTube, to find out more about the project. Thanks for listening.